No. He had a son before that with a lady named Hagar, right? Ishmael. So Isaac wasn't his only son. So what is he saying here? This is covenant words here. He's speaking something about. God is speaking something here. And he's saying, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac. Isn't it interesting that when you read in John, I like how John does it, where Jesus says, John actually, even in 1 John 2, your son, the love of, your only son, this idea of, that Jesus, being the Son of God, and that this love, the Son whom you love, that God's, it's amazing when you think that Jesus and the Father had this love relationship, this power, and this powerful relationship, and here he is, he's saying this to Abraham, the son that you love. This is not just some son that you don't mind getting rid of. This is not just one of those kids that you want to, hey, okay, go ahead, you can take him, God. Or you want me to get rid of him at. No, this is a son. This is the son that he loved. This powerful relationship that he had with Isaac. And he says, take him to Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountains which I tell you. Now you're going to go, what the heck? That is weird. God's telling Abraham to go sacrifice his son? That's like something that the weirdo, heathen gods did. That's not something that God ever required of somebody. What do you mean? But he's saying, go, take your son, your only son. And in verse 3 it says, and Abraham rose up early in the morning. I love that. I've probably preached on that a million times, worth repeating. That Hebrew wording does not mean just getting up early. It means a starting new, starting something over. He's starting over with something. Something new is about to happen. He's standing on the covenant promise of God, and he's doing what God's requiring of him. Looking at verse 5, it says, Abraham said to the young men, when they went to the mountain, they got there, and it's interesting that actually verse 4, it says on the third day. Verse 4, it says, on the third day, Abraham raised up his eyes and saw the place from a distance. I don't know, I just thought that was kind of an interesting little play on words there. And Abraham said to the young men, stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad shall go yonder, and we will worship and return to you. We will worship, and we will return to you. I like how Hebrews, Paul makes it plain. He says, Abraham knew that even if God had to, he would raise him from the dead. Wow. Isn't that amazing? Think about that first. Let that sink in. Like I said, I know this is like deep stake type of stuff here, but I want to think about this. God needed to get to earth through a man, a covenant partner. His covenant partner believed that God was able to raise him from the dead. And he stood on that faith. What did God do with Jesus? You think this thing's just kind of willy-nilly happened? Just, I don't know, God's... No! He was setting it up right here. In chapter 22 of Genesis, here is the beginning of what Jesus would go through. This is it right here. And then look here, let's go to verse 7. And Isaac spoke to Abraham and said, my father, he said, here I am, son. And he said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And look at what Abraham says. God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. God will provide for himself. God provided for himself a sacrifice. God provided for himself a sacrifice that would bring us back to him. That was through Jesus. God provided his own blood to bring us back to him. God provided the sacrifice. And then look at this right here. So he lays him out on the wood. He ties him up. The amazing thing is Isaac's not a little kid. And Abraham's not Abraham's an old man. I mean, we're talking like 100 plus years old. And at this point, Isaac is at least 15, 16 years old. Now, I want you to imagine some 100-year-old man wrestling some kid down on wood. No, I'm pretty certain at this point, Isaac must be in the same faith that Abraham has to lay down and let this old man tie him up. He's probably thinking, man, Abraham, you getting senile? What are you doing here? No, but he trusted him because he knew he was a man of God. He knew what was going on because Abraham taught him the covenant. He's circumcised. Isaac's circumcised. They know the covenant. They know the promise that God had made. This was so real to them that when God spoke and told his covenant partner. Now the thing is, you say, well, that's just such an... This is the only time it had to be done. Because God just needed his covenant partner, his partner on earth, to do it. And once it came about, it was done. And look at this here. In verse 10, it says, he stretched out his hand and he took the knife to slay his son. But the angel called out to him and said, Abram, Abram. And he said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son. I love that. Your only son. So now God would not withhold his son, his only son. God was required to now. Why? Because back here in verse 1, Nasa, the requirement of the fulfillment of the covenant. God was required to provide a lamb. God was required to provide his son, his only son, and not withhold him from the earth. God was required. You guys getting this? Are you still following me? I know this is like really deep stuff, but this is amazing. God was required to provide the sacrifice. Go ahead and turn back over to Hebrews. Now I'm really finished, I promise. Is that number 2? Okay, I got to finish one more time, so. God provided a sacrifice. And through Abraham came Jesus. Eventually one day, here you go. Here he is. Here's the promised child. Here's the one that would come and would bring about the new covenant. I like how Hebrews 7:22 says it. It says that Jesus became a guarantee of a better covenant. A better covenant. Based upon better promises. The eternal blood. This is amazing. This is the blood. The blood of God ran in Jesus' veins. We're not just talking some guy that ran around in Galilee that was hung on a cross. This is God. He was totally man, but he was totally God. The blood of God was shed for the humanity's sin. Once and for all. Paid for. Why? Because Abraham stood on the covenant promise. Why? Because God had a way to do it, and he needed to do it this way. This was the only way it was going to come about. Now, what does it mean here? Look at chapter 8, verse 6. It says, but now Jesus, having obtained a more excellent ministry, as much as he has become the mediator of a better covenant, which is enacted on better promises. What does that mean? Better covenant based upon better promises. You know why our covenant is so much better than... See, the old covenant, you learn about eventually later on came the priesthood and the sacrifices and all these different things I'm not even going to go into. But blood had to be shed. Blood had to be shed. And that blood, the blood of the bulls and goats and stuff when they did the different ceremonies during Passover, all it did was push sin forward. It basically said, okay, you're okay for a while. You're okay. We're going to overlook these things. I'm not going to destroy you. But it only pushed it forward. It just kept pushing it forward. I kind of think of it, kind of like, when you got to clean your garage, right? And you have all this stuff there, and you kind of just start pushing it up against the wall, and then you get some more stuff, and you just start pushing it up against the wall. And next thing you know, you can't get out of your garage anymore. You need somebody to go in there and totally redo it. Well, that's Jesus. He came, and he totally wiped away all the sin that had been pushed forward for that whole period of time. All this sin. And once and for all, Jesus paid the price with the blood of God. That's what was shed here to pay the price. So it's not based upon your abilities. It's not based upon your righteousness. It's a better covenant because it's based upon God and his blood. Do you guys follow that? The church, I love how it said that in Hebrews chapter 12 that we read earlier, where it says, of righteous men made perfect. Do you realize that in the blood of Christ, you are made perfect? You say, well, I still screw up. I still mess up. Yeah, you are going to sin. You're going to fail. That's why we have 1 John 1:9. You confess your sin. He's faithful and just to forgive you, cleanse you of all unrighteousness. You're made perfect again. Again and again and again. You are perfect because your perfection is not based upon what you do, but upon Jesus. And I loved, what did Jesus do? When he rose from the dead, it says he went before the throne of God. And I can imagine him holding, like the Old Testament priest used to take the blood of the offering and walk into the Holy of Holies and present it before God. This blood that sat before the throne of God is a constant reminder that our debt was paid once and for all.